Welcome to Amid AI. Check the link below to learn more about our new AI Lab and Founder Fellowship located on Market Street in San Francisco.
Here we are. We got a three-person interview today. It's the first time that we've done this. I've asked my good friend Kazi Hussein, one of the founders of Thread, to join me in this conversation, and we're interviewing Peter Gao, who is founder of a company called Aquarium Learning, and I believe you've got a couple products in the works with different names. At least one product that you're going to tell us about. But I'm excited to have you both here, and we're not going to do introductions for myself or Kazi. We're going to jump straight to you, Peter. So thankful for you to join us, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and what has led up to building of this product.
Yeah. So I'm Peter. I'm co-founder and CEO of Aquarium, and we have two products. One is originally we just called it Aquarium, but now we call it Illume, which is focused on computer vision. And then the other one, which is more recent, is something called Tidepool, which is more focused on text and kind of more like generative AI use cases. So my background is I grew up in the Bay Area, mostly in South Bay, and went to Berkeley for school. So now I'm in San Francisco, so I've been in the Bay for most of my life. And in school, I was kind of more doing a mix of traditional like web development. I was at Pinterest and Khan Academy for my internships. But I was also pretty interested in deep learning at that time, which was still very nascent back in 2013 through 2015. And so I ended up doing some research on Caffe, which is the original deep learning framework before TensorFlow in the bad old days of grad students maintaining code bases. And then from there, I went to Cruise. I was employee number 18 at Cruise. I helped build up a lot of the general driving system, but most of my focus was on the perception system, a lot of the deep learning, modeling, and infrastructure around that. And then in 2019, I left Cruise and started Aquarium, which I'm happy to talk more about or go through any of the above in more detail. So, yeah.
Awesome. Very impressive background. I'm a Bay Area native myself from Berkeley. So sounds like we both spent some time over there in the East Bay, and we're all three here in San Francisco today, which we'll talk a little bit more about the AI community here later in the conversation. But yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, it sounds like you have two products in market, one of them more computer vision oriented. I can see how what you were working on with Cruise may have led to that. Are you still supporting that product, or have you kind of shifted a focus because of a lot of the new large language model development in the last couple of years and the excitement there? Can you just give us a sense of where the focus is, how you guys are thinking about the product suite?
Yeah, so we are still running both products. The computer vision product has quite a bit of revenue and also people who are using it. And so that's still running. Mainly, it's just that this last year or two has been pretty hectic in NLP. And so most of our effort right now in terms of development is standing up Tidepool, which is kind of more focused on basically analytics for text data. So the idea basically is that if you have a lot of text data, you couldn't really query it before in the same way that you might be able to do with SQL. And even before LLMs, it was possible to do these things, but it was very difficult and it was very time consuming to get that working. But now with the combination of LLMs and basically lightweight classifiers and embedding analysis, these sort of new technologies are coming together and allow you a way to ask questions of large scale text data in a way that works with your existing analytics or business intelligence stack. So what our product Tidepool does basically is helps you structure unstructured data. So being able to understand attributes of your data, like what are the most common themes in my user feedback, or what are the sort of topics that correlate most with user engagement, and be able to take in both the metadata and the unstructured text from your data warehouse and be able to derive insights that can drive your business forward. So we sit kind of on top of your data warehouse and allow you to set up these structured questions that you can then put back into your data warehouse, put into Mode, put into Looker, and understand really what is going on with your user reviews or with the prompts that users are typing into your LLM apps, or themes in like, your user surveys or whatnot. So it's been an exciting time compared to what was possible before, which I'm also happy to talk about, the progression from 2015 to now, at least from what I've seen in machine learning.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because seems like you came from a space of understanding visual information or a different format of information, and now you're looking at text, which you know I imagine you have in mind a master plan of how these things kind of assemble into a product suite where it's like understand all the all the information that's flowing into your service, whether it's text or images or you know like personally as a
Audio.
product builder, yeah, audio, but even like what's the user behavior of someone on my app or on my website, which
Yeah.
is coming in different modalities. But yeah, I'd love to understand. I'm curious, Kazi, chime in at any time if you have any specific questions. But Peter, you've been working in this space for a while now since your time at Berkeley. How have things changed, and how has that changed your approach as a business and as a startup leader as you're building Aquarium?
Yeah, so I would say that the three big phases, I would say, of machine learning that I've seen so far. I think the first phase that I was witness to was kind of in like the 2000s to like, early 2010s, which was recommendation systems and kind of more traditional structured data machine learning. So in that realm, what you would do is you would have things like, Facebook, what we refer to now as like the algorithm, where you have like newsfeed ranking and things like that. And, that worked based off of very basic models. These were things like logistic regression, random forest, whatever. And the inputs were basically like, actions that people were taking on your site. What do they click? Like, oh, if recommended this, do they actually, click that recommendation or not? And in that phase of machine learning development, a lot of the focus was on feature engineering. You would have to handcraft features that was kind of like the salient information about how your users were doing certain things, and then be able to feed that into your like very rudimentary machine learning model. And then hopefully that would improve your performance in terms of recommending better content, right? So all the like superstars of that era were like, a combination of like data engineers and data scientists who were playing around with features, doing experiments with modeling. And that, worked obviously as, everyone's getting, recommended stuff on TikTok and it's so addictive. But, the sort of limitations were that it didn't work well for unstructured data like imagery and text and audio, which makes up something like 90% of like business data these days, and is the way that humans kind of more intuitively understand the world. So deep learning comes around in 2012 and offers this way that you can get way better performance on imagery at that point. And the way is that you don't have to make features anymore, because it's kind of hard to understand what are the right features that you should extract from this like raw data. And in the case of imagery, it's like, what are the right features for imagery? It was kind of unclear, and people did a lot of research on this and hand tuned like these very complicated pipelines, and they didn't work that well. And the way that worked was that you essentially have a deep neural network be able to learn features automatically. And then it can kind of figure out, okay, this is like, these corners are very interesting. These textures are very interesting. And then, understand the most important features to be able to make the right decision, which is like, this is a cat or a dog in this photo, or like, this is like, the outline of the object that you care about, or like, maybe this is the road versus the sky in this image or whatever. And so that was great. That unlocked a lot of stuff. And in my view, it actually made self-driving work overall. And the problem with that approach with traditional deep learning was the reliance on labeled data sets, which is that the way that you make this stuff work is that you basically take a bunch of raw images or audio or text, and you would have to get a human to go and hand label, like, this is a cat, this is a dog, this is a shrimp, this is like, a fish or something, to train the model on. And you would need, basically like millions of images to get really good performance, or millions of audio clips to get good performance. And you would always have these like weird edge cases that didn't work so well. And so you'd have to spend a bunch of time and a bunch of operations money. You would have to pay like millions of dollars to like label these data sets. So the capability was really high, but then the barrier to entry was also really high. And so a lot of the stuff that you can see now that people are doing was possible 4 years ago. So you need a really big machine learning team to do it. Whereas this third wave, I would say in the last year or two, has been about not needing labeled data sets. It's about being able to train like really massive models on really massive data sets and having that basically work out of the box without needing further, fine tuning in order to make it work well for your use case, which means that not only is it much easier to get started without needing to build all this infrastructure yourself and label all this data yourself, but it also means that the interface is more approachable, where like you're not having to essentially communicate with a machine learning model via labels. You're instead communicating it by like writing, I want you to do this, or pay attention to this, or like think step by step. And I think that basically has unlocked a lot of the sort of possibilities that you can see people building these amazing apps with. And also was like kind of the reason for us to build Tidepool was like seeing that there was this new way of doing machine learning that unlocked a lot more capabilities that otherwise were just not possible, like even like a year or two ago. Yeah.
So that's a awesome history lesson there for everyone. Really interesting. I'm gonna go rewatch that and
yeah, clip it and put it on your your Insta Shorts reel or whatever.
But yeah, exactly. And for the algorithm to to pick up. But
yeah.
So you started Aquarium Learning in, was it 2019, 2020, around that?
It was February 2020, so it is pretty much 4 years. I think our 4-year anniversary is going to be in 2 days. That was when we incorporated. Wow. Yeah,
that's awesome. 4 years is far longer than most make it. But I'm wondering. So it sounds like you started Aquarium during like the period 2, and now this third period of machine learning has arrived. And so that, would you say that has, is it both opportunistically, like you see this new capability, but also like if you didn't change what you were doing, that there's like an onslaught of new companies that are gonna use this new approach to disrupt people who are breathing and who are building in the second paradigm? Like is that a good characterization?
I would say that there's both a blessing and a curse to the LLM revolution. And I think basically the way I would summarize it is like this. When we were working on computer vision at Cruise, and this is like, self-driving has like a lot of just like very difficult problems where you have to be able to make sure that like your model works like 99% of the time. If you screw up like traffic light detection, your car is going to go through the intersection. So it has to be right all the time. And you have to have multiple layers of making sure that it's right so that nothing bad could ever happen. And so we looked at, okay, like, there's self-driving and the technology works here. It's possible to make it work here. But then, there's all these other industries that you can use computer vision for that are much easier than self-driving. And so if you can imagine like people who are like spraying weeds with like robots, people doing satellite imagery analysis, people doing like, content analysis for like social media imagery, stuff like that. And the reality was that it was like, something like 10 times to 100 times easier for some of these applications to make them work. And then what happened is with LLMs and this most recent wave of large models, it is like, this is what happens when it's like 1,000 times easier. When it's like 1,000 or 10,000 times easier, now anyone can build a machine learning project from scratch without needing to have a big team behind them. And so what I think is going to happen, though, is that you look at the space of use cases that still have this kind of like fine tuning approach. I need to collect my own data set. I need to train my own model. I need to host my own infrastructure. And that's going to still exist because there are cases where you have really stringent accuracy requirements, or you need to be able to run something very quickly or not rely on an external API. or you really, 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 care about the data privacy, like these are still going to exist in like the defense field, in the medical field, in like safety critical things like aviation and in self-driving. But I think that will probably, end up being like 10-20% of the market, because now the other 80% of the market is all these people who wanted to do these things before, but the barrier to entry was so high that they couldn't even, contemplate spending $10 million on like an ML team and its associated operations and infrastructure. And so this 80% of people is now like unlocked by like the lower barrier to entry. And I think what we'll see over time is that 80% will probably grow as models become more powerful. So right now, what you're seeing is that it's happening in LLMs with NLP, where like with language, you previously had to, again, like go spin up a team, train your own model, fine tune on your own data sets. That was all possible in like 2020, right? But now, like anyone can do it, and you can see how many use cases kind of ballooned as a result. And I think what you're seeing with research that's coming out of like, Google and DeepMind and Facebook is that like this is going to happen with imagery. This is going to happen with like audio, where if you just like have bigger models on bigger data sets, it will do a better job out of the box for the vast majority of use cases. And so now what you're essentially seeing is that like there's still going to be, a lot of people who are doing even like, traditional recommendations. That hasn't gone away. There's also going to still be a lot of people who are doing like model fine tuning. That's not going to go away. But it's more that like the number of people who are able to access like state of the art computer vision or NLP or whatever is going to grow as these new models come out and unlock kind of this new way of setting up a machine learning system. Yeah.
Peter, thank you for that answer. That was very well thought out. Also, I'm really curious, you built Aquarium and now you're building Tidepool. What are some of the popular BI use cases and semantic search that you're noticing from your customers right now? Yeah, if you can elaborate on that, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. So let me give an example from like, let's say you have like an LLM app. And so previously, the way that people would interact with, software really was through like a user interface where you have your mouse or your like, phone app, and you like click on this button, you tap on that slider or like whatever, and you capture these user interactions, and you can do analysis on them with things like amplitude or with mode or looker. And then you use this to understand, okay, well, like, here are like, the places in my user funnel where like, people are signing up or they're churning or like dropping out. And now we've introduced this new way of interacting with software, which is to use like, a text interface. And now the tools that you used to use for the structured data of like click interactions now does not work with this unstructured data of text. So if you want to be able to ask a very basic question, like, how many of my, user prompts contain code snippets? How do you do that? Maybe you can like go and like, do keyword search or something like that. And you like, try to look for like, some Python, terminology or something like that, but it's like not really going to do it that well. Or if you want to do it well, you're going to have to get a data scientist to go in there and like, train a model or like, try to prompt an LLM to do the right thing. So the way that you can get around this, or the way that you're supposed to properly solve this, is that you can use like NLP to be able to scan through all of your user interactions and understand, okay, like, I am looking for code snippets, and, define that in a prompt that a user can specify. And then LLM will be able to go and identify, okay, here's like, prompts that contain code snippets, and maybe here's like a Python code snippet, here's a C++ code snippet, here's like, whatever. But then if you are like dealing with hundreds of millions of user interactions, this is going to cost you a lot of money. Like this will literally cost you like tens of thousands of dollars per query, which is, not a sustainable approach to doing analytics every time you have a question. So the way that we basically tackle this is to combine this with kind of that type 2 machine learning that people were doing before with fine tuning, which is to use a large language model to be able to like essentially label some set of data that you can then train a much lighter weight subclassifier on. And now this much lighter weight subclassifier can go through every single user interaction you have, your hundreds of millions of user interactions, and for literally like 100 to 500x less money, tell you, okay, here's all the places that you have code snippets. and then be able to correlate that to, okay, I have some metadata signal of engagement, someone like thumbs up or thumbs down this, prompt result or something. And I want to see, okay, like which of the code, are we better on or worse on? Like, oh, we're actually really good at Python. People are they're thumbs upping all that stuff, but then they're really bad at C++. We're getting thumbs downs on all those. Maybe we should go take a look at our model. Maybe we should go look at our UI and make some changes. But, as a result, this is just dealing with text, right? And whether it's like an LLM prompt that a user's typing in, or whether it's like a review that someone is leaving on Yelp, or the title of a document they're creating in Notion, these are all like text, components that you would want to analyze and introspect and ask questions of. So the beauty really of this technology is that, before you could do it, but it would be really hard. But now you can both get the ease of use that prompting allows, but also the scalability that these more lightweight models allow in the same package. And that's what Tidepool offers.
Awesome. And what are the top 3 use cases specifically that you would notice from Tidepool right now from your customers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you want to understand how users are interacting with your product. And if I were to kind of break down the 3 that I've seen become the most common, I would say number 1 is existing user generated content on your product. As I was mentioning before, like the Yelp reviews or the comments on Instagram or the titles of your documents. I would say number 2 is kind of conversations with your users that you get with essentially B2B products. So for example, if you are doing a messaging platform for marketing and you're having these conversations with your users, are your users asking about pricing? Are they asking about your feature set? What are the things that they're most interested in? Same for support conversations. Are they complaining about front end bugs? Are they complaining about pricing issues? These are all things that you would want to understand in those interactions. And then third, kind of as I mentioned before, is kind of if you have an LLM app with a lot of users and you want to be able to understand the overall kind of user behavior trends so that you can then optimize your product development for those use cases. So those would be my top 3.
Awesome. So your customers are people who or companies that are building software products primarily, right? It's like the developers are directly interfacing with Tidepool and they're incorporating that into an application versus a business owner being able to pull an off the shelf recipe. Is that accurate that your primary users are on the product or engineering team of a company?
I wouldn't say they're necessarily engineering teams in the sense that what they are essentially using to implement this, you have to kind of plug this into your data warehouse and in your data pipeline. That's obviously going to take engineering resources. But kind of the beauty is that once you do have this integrated into your data pipeline, now you can have a lot of different users go log into Tidepool and then type in, I want to understand, what are the sales pitch decks in my user content? What do they look like? What do they talk about? And be able to get back an answer, get back a chart, get back categorizations of here's some examples of the sales pitch decks and here's some examples of non-sales pitch decks or something like that. So I would sort of consider it the same way that people use Mode or Looker, where it's a data team or an engineering team that kind of does the initial setup and plugging in, but then it's actually a lot of designers and marketing people and PMs and things like that who then go in there to either consume the data or to be able to ask their own questions without having to go bother the data scientists to write them a SQL query or write them in this case, a Jupyter notebook.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've seen and the conversations I've had, it feels like there, obviously OpenAI is taking a lot of air out of the room of the conversation about large language models. Obviously, there's a lot of other big players and companies that have raised money, but there's a lot of businesses that are saying, hey, this is opening up a lot of potential for us to do things like you just described. Would you say that often just the buyer behavior is that the company says, hey, we could now do this is possible, and they think of what it would be like to implement it themselves using an OpenAI model, and then they realize actually this is going to cost an insane amount of money. So then they come looking for and find Tidepool, and they say, this is the way that we actually need to do this, and they've built this for us. Is that kind of, I'm just thinking about the, you know, there's so many innovations happening here, but ultimately, like, this stuff is expensive if you're doing it at scale for a product.
Yeah.
So is that really how you're winning customers
Yeah.
over?
I would say that the way to think about, kind of the large LLM modeling companies are like the same way that you would think about a cloud provider, right? Like, if you think about something like, GCP versus AWS, like, you're going to have like, the ability to build all sorts of web applications and infrastructure on top of it. And so you could be like, all right, well, I'm going to go and build my own, like, analytics data warehouse. And you could do that, it would probably be a lot of money, but I'm sure Bloomberg has some, complicated internal thing they built. Or like you can go to a vendor like Snowflake, who's already built an entire stack on top of the existing cloud providers that you can plug into. And I think that kind of reflects like how things are going with the LLMs, where it's like, I'm sure if you want to build like a custom thing for your use case and it's quite simple to develop, then yeah, you can go and like, use GPT 3.5, or you can go use Gemini Pro out of the box and prompt it the right way to do what you want. But once you get into like kind of more complicated use cases, or as you kind of mentioned with us, like, we get into like much higher volumes of data, the complexity of these applications grows and grows and grows. And suddenly now you're like, okay, should I like build my own like, automated customer support engine, or should I go, use Forethought or something like that, or like Zendesk's AI features? On the other side of it is like, now, okay, I can, do analytics now that LLMs have unlocked this, but is my data volume at a scale where I'm okay with the cost of that for like a relatively small amount of data? If it's like, less than 1,000 data points, then an LLM does make sense. Just dump it into the context window, let it sort it out, or just read it yourself. Maybe it takes a few hours, but it'll be quite possible. Once you get into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of data points, now all of a sudden you're paying quite a bit of money. You're paying like, a few $1,000s for every single query, and it starts to be very painful. And I think the other thing that we've even noticed is actually about usability. Like, it actually turns out it's quite hard to prompt an LM in the right way. And so a lot of the work that people have been doing with LM interfaces is to essentially reduce the degrees of freedom that there are in approaching the LLM, so that a user can say, this is what I want, whether it's through like a template or through like kind of like, a more like reduced set of inputs, and then have a prompt around that kind of handles the details for their application. And then you can get the right results from the LLM without having to go and, spend a few hours like mucking around with like a prompt playground on your own.
Yeah. It's the magic when someone finds the right recipe of prompts or workflows that are connected. It makes all the difference versus someone who's just opening up ChatGPT and like typing something in off the top of their head, right? It's
Yeah. I think that like the sort of initial conception that people had with LLMs was that now it is trivial for anyone off the street to be able to go and do what they want with a large language model. And I think now that we're kind of like a year into ChatGPT, I think people are realizing that it does take quite a bit of tuning and development and testing and iteration to get good results out of something. Like, there's just like not only just like the prompt engineering and like, oh yeah, if you like format something in Markdown, or if you put something at the beginning of the prompt versus the end of the prompt, it has drastic effects on the quality of the model. Like, this is just not intuitive for the normal user. But you also have kind of like the whole infrastructural setup around it. Like, how does it access context? How does it access like your sort of like private user data? You have these things like security, like, are we going to want to like deploy this in our own environment, or do we want to go call an API? Like, these all stack up complexity. And I think even my view right now is that LLMs are like still like orders of magnitudes easier than, trying to go build your own traditional ML stack with like supervised fine tuning. but
Yeah.
it is not like you set it up in a week and it works. It's like you can set up the demo in a week, but getting it to kind of like the 80% accuracy it takes to make it to production, it's going to take like a month or two at minimum,
Yeah.
depending on the complexity of what you're trying to do.
For LLM
Yeah.
apps, would you say that's the delta of value from Tidepool? Is the reducing the infrastructural complexity around creating that right level of prompt engineering that they can now easily see the LLM apps themselves, so they can then feed that to their users?
Yeah, well, we do analytics. Like some people use the analytics to, for example, give their marketing team like an idea of like, all right, I have like a lot of different personas of people who are using my products, and they're all putting in different prompts. So I want to see like in persona A versus persona B, what are like the top three like canonical types of prompts that they use? How do they correlate to engagement? Like, these are sort of questions that are outside of kind of the LLM development flow that you still want to be able to know about as like another non-engineering stakeholder in the team. But yeah, it's true. Like if you're like a ML engineer, an AI engineer, I guess is what they're called these days, like you're still going to want to say, hey, I've noticed that our users are complaining about this edge case. I want to go look through all of the historical prompts that I've had and find more examples of this edge case. I want to be able to inspect them to understand kind of like, what are they about? What are the types of variation with it? And then I want to be able to pull that down and add that to either like, a training set if I'm going to go fine tune something to solve it, or I'm going to add it to my validation set so that as I kind of develop against it, as I prompt engineer against it, that I know these things start to flip from failing to passing over time. So I think that like there is some amount of like, yes, like, it is part of the LLM development flow, but I think what we've tried to do with this product is to be kind of a more generalist tool for accessing text data for the entire team.
Solid.
Awesome.
Love that.
So to just wrap us up here, because we've been at it for a while now, but yeah, we're all here in the Bay Area. I'd love to just get, Peter and Kazi, if you want to chime in here as well, just, your feeling on like the excitement around this space, like what, like, especially Peter, you've been involved in building with machine learning for, sounds like going on 10 years now, and back to your time even before that at Cal, but like talk a little bit about the energy in San Francisco around AI and LLMs and so forth right now.
Okay, I would zoom out even further, and I would say, growing up in the Bay Area, my mom was in tech, and so when I was growing up, I would, go to AOL, I would go to Yahoo. I remember when, times were tough and they took away the drinks fridge at AOL, and then you knew that layoffs were coming. But, I think that we were in this very interesting time in tech in general. I would say, number one, that you have these waves of hype, and it's unavoidable, and some of them are quite legitimate, right? Like if I were just to look at the last like 4 years, like, there was like all this like, stuff around remote work when the pandemic happened. And I think a lot of it is going to be durable. A lot of people use Zoom these days still, like, but, I use Slack huddles all the time. But there was obviously like some amount of like, hype and enthusiasm. And then there was kind of some deflation there, and like, some of it will stick around, some of it won't. And then, in 2020, 2021, you had the zero interest rate hype around essentially crypto. And, I think I never personally believed in it apart from being like a tool for speculation. But even that was like a massive amount of hype where some people were kind of like more like the libertarian, like, idealists of like, this is how society should be organized in terms of its currency. And then you had other people who were just, pump and dumping on like their coin of choice, And I would say that you can even see that in Silicon Valley, where like season 1 was about apps, and then they were talking about ICOs in like season 2 or 3. But at the end, they actually came back to AI. And this is the thing that I think is so cool about like, AI as it relates to San Francisco, which is that I think it is something that is both super exciting as a concept, but it also like has a lot of societal impact and like the ability to like make something quite useful for people. I take Waymos everywhere now. It's like they're all around the city, and they're like, much nicer than Ubers. They're like, much safer as well. And, that's going to be something that I think is going to be very long-term impactful after, I got hit by a drunk driver back in like college, right? But then I think there's also kind of, this huge amount of energy happening right now where like, I think, during 2020 and 2021, like most people left San Francisco, they moved to Miami, they moved to Austin, like they kind of like were like, the city's dead. It's like kind of a hellhole. And, San Francisco has its problems, but, a first wave of people came back when the bars reopened. But now, like, as soon as generative AI came back, now like there's events all over the place. It brought the parties back. There's like like ML happy hours every week. Like, there's all these meetups, like there's all these events. And I think there's a lot of energy around the kind of possibilities here. And I think the good and the bad parts of any hype wave are also recurring here, which is like, the good part is that you have so much energy, so much talent, so much capital coming into this field, and that's going to accelerate progress. And you can already see it with like, all these like, gargantuan rounds being raised, and like, these new models that are coming out every month that kind of upend whatever you were doing, before that. But I think the bad parts of the hype are that, like, you go to the meetups, and I think a lot of people are still, I would say, in an aspirational stage. And what I mean by that is that some people are coming in from like adjacent fields, software engineering, and they're kind of like, hey, I want to get into AI. And they're still trying to learn about how to get stuff working, which is awesome. But I think like a lot of like kind of the community around the events are still people who are kind of like learning from each other, as opposed to kind of like the people who have been doing a lot of stuff practically or have been in the field for quite a while. They're at NeurIPS, or they're at like, more like, focus meetups that are hosted by VCs. Like they're not at a lot of like the parties really, which I hope that, we can have kind of more intermingling between those groups. I think another thing that I could see is that a lot of people are in this field, not because they are legitimately interested in the technology or the applications or, the topic, but they're there because it's, making money, and they want to chase the hype, and they want to, like pump it up their coin, but in the Gen AI, which I think, like is an impure motive, but it just adds noise to the conversation. But I think in the medium term, these folks will leave when things become less hot, which I think, leads to my third point, which is like, this is like the first time in 20 years where people are having mass layoffs across the industry, and I think Gen AI has been this bubble of, like there's, just infinite money flowing from every single corner into any company doing anything with it. But I think now that we're a year into it, people are understanding what is real and what is not. And people are looking more at kind of like the core metrics rather than like, your background. They're interested in what are your user stats. They're interested in revenue. They're interested in like the core utility of it versus it being just a curiosity that people try out. And I think that this year is going to be the real make or break in terms of, okay, we've had the hype, we have the excitement, we've had, all the investment that we put into it, but now we got to start delivering. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same boat as fintech where like, everyone's getting laid off. So I think it's an exciting time because, it's so uncertain. And on the one hand, you have to be on your toes because the technology is changing every day, and you can, be, with your community and, figuring out how to use these new things as they come out every day. And that's awesome. But I think the flip side of this uncertainty and the speed is that you have to be on the top of your game to keep up with this and to show actual value to users.
Yeah,
which I think was a good note to end on. So,
Peter, this was an awesome conversation. Kazi, thanks for joining me, and you asked some really amazing questions that got to the details of like, how people can go get value from Tidepool right now. Peter, what are the websites to check you guys out at? Because I know you got a product that's like mature and in market, and people are using it with much success.
Yeah, just check out tidepool.so. It's tidepool.so. We have a self-serve option if you want to just sign up and try it for yourself. And if you're interested in kind of getting, like a walkthrough, we were definitely in the early days, and we'd be happy to just like jump on a call and give you a demo and do a demo for your use case on your own data. So feel free to reach out to me. I am Gao at aquariumlearning.com. That's AQUARIUM learning.com. And again, hope to talk to you soon.
Yeah, and not to be too much riding the hype train, but Amid actually is opening an IRL space. Kazi and I are actually in subsequent call boxes right now, and we will certainly be having some events and speaker series. But I think, Peter, your feedback on like what is needed in those events, having people who have been building in the space for a long time, and certainly one of our goals is also to bring in people from outside the echo chamber a bit, people from industries where this can make a big impact, get their, their feedback on how they're using these tools, what they need, what they want, and also start building some bridges to actually help companies get those users that they're going to be evaluated on. So you'll learn more about that soon. But thanks a lot, Peter, for the great convo, and hope to talk again soon.
Yeah, I got to visit y'all. I haven't been to the IKEA yet.
Well, good. All right.